The company setup process in Dubai can be a minefield. I made a ton of mistakes when I did it, and pretty much everyone I know who has gone through the process has made at least one of the top 5 mistakes that I'm going to share to you in this video, because the process of setting up a company in Dubai can be the smoothest process in the world if you do it properly, but there are so many things that can go wrong in the process that most people, unless they have the right advice, things can go very wrong. There's so many cases that we hear all the time of people even setting up a company but doing it wrong, doing with a bad service provider or something like that, so that then they have to dissolve that company and go through the process again to do it right. There's cases of people setting up companies and not getting banking for these companies simply because they made one of these mistakes. So you want to make sure that you watch this video and you avoid these 5 mistakes so that you can do it right the first time and not end up with mistakes costing you thousands and thousands of dollars like I did. And the first of these, and arguably the biggest one, is using a bad free zone / a bad service provider if you are using one. So in Dubai, when you're setting up a company, you can either set up a mainland company or a free zone company. Most foreigners are setting up a free zone company. This is if you're doing business mainly online, you're selling outside of the UAE. And when you do that, you're going to set up your company in one of the various free zones, essentially these free trade areas in the UAE. And there's companies within all these free zones that help you set up those companies. But the thing here to understand is that these free zones are absolutely not created equal. And you've seen all of these ads online where people are advertising Dubai company setup for 3,000 dirhams, 4,000 dirhams, 2,000 dirhams, even 1,000 dirhams. But what always is the case with these very cheap services is that you're going with a very bad free zone. And in this case, in this industry, like many cases, you get what you pay for. Some free zones have a better reputation than others, specifically a reputation in terms of how well they comply with government regulations and things like that. And banks know that. So the first big issue that you're going to have with bad free zones is you might not even get banking for your company. You might be able to set up your company, it might go smoothly, but then when you go and open a bank account, even with like Wio or like one of these online banks, they might not open your bank account because they see the free zone that you're with, which they essentially don't want to be associated with, which then leads you to have to close that company. And by the way, you don't get your money back, and then have to go set up another company in a proper free zone so that you can get banking and actually run that company. And the second big issue is that the experience is simply going to be completely different. When you need to get some simple document that would take like a few days with a good free zone, it might take 4 months with a bad free zone. I had this exact case with one of my friends. They used a bad free zone. First of all, it took months to set up a company when it should take only like 1 or 2 weeks. And then when they needed to do like simple changes, like change something about their company, it would take months and months and months. So they had to close that company and set up a new one and do it properly. So you want to do this properly the first time, because using one of these bad free zones, it's going to be cheaper up front, but it's going to cost you a lot more down the line in mistakes and just hassle, like time that you would rather be spending actually making money for your business rather than on these administrative issues. And this same thing goes for service provider. You first of all want to choose a service provider that only works with the best free zones, because again, if you go with one of these cheap services that just want to churn out as many companies as possible, what they do to get the price down is use cheap and bad free zones. And what these bad service providers do is that they'll be very responsive until you pay, but after you paid, their response times go down. They might even just completely run away. And if you have any issues, it is essentially on you to figure that out. Obviously on the channel, I partner with the company Genzone, and they're the only ones that I've ever promoted, because in my opinion, they simply provide the best service in the market at the best price. The price is not the cheapest in the market, but that is mainly because they work with the best free zones. Their service fee that they charge is actually very small. And what you get with them is not just a service to set up your company up front, but you get access to them on WhatsApp directly throughout the lifetime of your business. And this is something that I really wish I had when I was setting up my business. The struggles weren't even with the actual process of setting up the company, but the struggles were when I was going to this new country, this new culture. There's so many moments where I just didn't quite know what to do. Like, oh, should I do it like this? Should I do it like that? Should I use this or that? I really wish I had access to someone, an expert who has done this hundreds of times, who could help me throughout the process and who I could message and who would respond to me quickly with answers to any questions that I have. This is what you get with Genzone. If you're interested in using their service, you can use my link down below in the description to book a free consultation. Now, the second big mistake is using a high risk activity. So when you're setting up a company in the UAE, you need to choose the business activities of your companies. And again, these business activities are not created equal. If you're in a high risk industry like crypto activities, like other kinds of activities that banks might not like, is useful to again work with someone who knows what these high risk activities are. So again, you don't end up in a situation where you set up your company, but now no bank wants to work with you because they don't want to associate with that activity. So you want to know exactly which activities you should not choose on your license. And by the way, in practice, no one checks these activities. Like they don't really affect anything. Like it just says it on your license. So you want to make sure you choose these activities very, very wisely. Mistake number 3 is having your visa canceled. So most people who set up a UAE company do it mainly because they want to use that company to get themselves a residence visa in the UAE. And it's very common in UAE and Dubai for people to live there sort of part-time, but they don't live there the entire time, myself included. But what you need to understand about these visas that you issue via your company is that in order to keep that visa valid, you need to visit the UAE at least one day every 6 months. So if you stay outside of the UAE for more than 6 months continuously, your visa is automatically going to be cancelled. Now, if you work with Genzone, they actually have like kind of workaround where you can stay up to 7 to 8 months out of the country. But just to be safe, if at all possible, you want to make sure that you visit the UAE at least one time every 6 months. If you want to not have this restriction, you should go for another type of visa. For example, the golden visa, which is a 10-year visa that doesn't have any requirements of how many times and when you need to visit the UAE. You can stay outside for the entire 10 years if you want, and you're still gonna keep your residence permit in case in the future you do want to go live in the UAE. Now, mistake number 4 is processing payments via the Dubai company. So many people will come to UAE, dissolve their UK, their US, their Canadian companies, and set up the UAE company to run, for example, their e-commerce business or their software business or some kind of business where you are processing payments with credit cards from your customers, for example, through Stripe or something like that. And this is a mistake because the UAE company and actually most company structures outside of the major ones like US and European companies are not that great as payment processing companies, because most credit cards, especially from the US, and a lot of people sell to the US, when these credit cards see a charge from a company that they're not in a jurisdiction that they're not as familiar with, like the UAE, these charges will be declined, which will lead to you as a business owner to lose a lot of money because of these declined payments. I had this issue myself. I was running an online course business when I first came to the UAE, and I had to actually set up a separate payment processing company, and I used the US LLC structure for this in order to actually be able to accept these payments. A lot of people, when they first come to the UAE, they will make this mistake because they will just assume that yes, I can process payments with a UAE company just like any other company, but this is often not the case. Now, this is not relevant for every type of business. Maybe you don't need to process payments, maybe this is not relevant for you, but if payment processing is a big part of your business, you might want to explore different company structures like the US LLC or a Hong Kong company or something like that on top of that. And again, if you want to set up a US LLC, Genzone actually also now does this in-house, and they will do it faster than any other provider that I've seen. You can get your US LLC set up in as little as 48 hours. So you can also check out that service in the link down below in the description. And mistake number 5 is not registering for corporate tax and VAT. So Dubai is no longer a fully zero tax jurisdiction. They've had the 5% VAT for quite a while now, and they now have a 9% corporate tax. Now, you might have heard from people like myself that most people don't actually have to pay this corporate tax because of what is called the small business relief. So essentially, if you make below 3 million dirhams a year in revenue, at least until the end of 2026, you don't actually have to pay this corporate tax because your company is essentially exempt from it as a small business. But what most people don't realize is that even if you fall below the small business threshold, you still have to register for corporation tax. And there are fines if you don't register in time. If you're wondering how to register, I made a full video on that on this channel, which you can watch after this one. So that is the first registration. And the second thing to understand about corporate tax is that, again, even if you don't have to pay any corporate tax, you still have to file a corporate tax return. I actually just filed mine just a couple of weeks ago. It's a very, very easy process, but you have to make this filing because it is on this filing that you actually apply for the small business relief. But the third thing to understand is that you also have to register for VAT. So in the UAE, the threshold for when you have to register is 375,000 dirhams in taxable supplies, where taxable supplies basically mean any revenue that you directly make via your company. Now, some revenue is exempted, like if you get dividends from a foreign company, like for example, if you have this US LLC set up, the dividends you get from the US LLC are exempted in these tax taxable supplies, but any direct revenue will count towards the taxable supplies. Once you cross the threshold, you have to register for VAT. Now, again, whether you have to charge VAT or not is a different thing. Some types of sales are zero rated, sometimes are not zero rated. I'm gonna make a more detailed future guide on this so you can know exactly how to do it. So these are the big 5 mistakes, but there are actually even more mistakes that many people like myself commonly make in the process of relocating to the UAE. So this was only relating to the company, but if you want to avoid all the other mistakes to make when you're actually moving to Dubai yourself, I absolutely recommend you watch this video right here. So if you avoid the mistakes in this video and that video, you can be sure that your experience of setting up a UAE company and moving to Dubai is completely smooth.